Hey folks, it's Charlie in Westeros here, and I am back once again at long last after a 2-week hiatus with another Game of Thrones TV show review or TV episode review. Today I will be reviewing episode 8 of season 4, and the episode is entitled The Mountain and the Viper. And as I always say, these episode reviews are spoiler free, so there are no spoilers. So if you have not read the books, fear not, you will not have anything spoiled for you here. So keep watching. But if you have read the books and want to hear a spoiler-friendly discussion, you can tune into my group discussion with James Johnson and Company every Wednesdays at 8 p.m. And I will post a link to his channel in the info section below, and a link to, I guess, that video once it is available. We do it live, so you can tune in then whenever you... when it is taking place, that is, which is again Wednesday 8 p.m. Strongly encourage you to go there and ask questions or whatnot, and we'll try to answer them after our own discussion. So without further ado, let me get into this review. So the first thing I think I have to say about this episode is the title. Now, normally I would have some kind of deep or profound comment to make about how the title ties into many different events in the episode itself. But I actually think that this time, for a change, the episode title really just refers to the duel between the Mountain, Gregor Clegane, and the Viper, who is Oberyn Martell. You could make, I guess, a few other analogies between characters who could be perceived as a Mountain and a Viper, but truth be said, I really just perceive it as directly corresponding to these two characters. But if I think of anything else in the next couple days, then I'll be sure to share it in the spoiler-friendly discussion. Anyway, I guess the biggest thing I got out of this episode or the biggest statement that is made, is the fact that you really cannot expect your favorite characters or anybody you care for, anybody good in the series as a whole, to survive. They almost have to become evil or bad in order to thrive in this universe of Game of Thrones. And this was made through a bunch of events and characters, like with Ramsay and Roose in the north when they conquer Moat Catelyn. Of course, the biggest one is the duel at the very end when our latest favorite character gets killed off, Oberyn Martell. Of course, with Sansa Stark's seemingly change in attitude, or a more deceitful persona emerging, I guess, if that makes sense, could also be perceived as in line with this, understanding that quote-unquote good or nice characters really cannot live in this universe. And there's a few quotes in this episode that I think reaffirms that idea, but I will get to them when I get to them. So, as always, I recap events very briefly by location rather than by necessarily chronological order. So I guess I'll start by talking about events in the north. So in the north, we have Gilly, who's having a tense conversation with one of the prostitutes at Molestown before the village is attacked by Stir of the Thenns, Tormund Giantsbane, and their armies, along with Ygritte, of course. And of course, Gilly is discovered by Ygritte, but she is spared, surprisingly, by her, which is quite nice for us, because that means Gilly gets to live another day. The news of and actually I think this is probably one of the only semi-positive outcomes that occurs in this episode, actually, if I think about it now. Anyway, so the news of the attack reaches the Wall, where Sam basically laments his decision to leave Gilly there, and he basically believes her dead. Now, I said this before, and I gotta say it again, of course, this was one of the dumbest things Sam could have done by putting Gilly in Molestown. Sam, why on earth would he do that? He's such a book-smart, worldly, knowledgeable character, yet in terms of, I guess, street smarts, he's completely stupid. And, well, I guess he learned his lesson in this case. But luckily for us, at least we're given the information that it is likely that Gilly is still alive. So, hopefully, we'll see her again very soon. I think one quote that was stated during this scenery in the north was by one of the members of the Night's Watch, when this member says, quote, "When I am done with this world, I don't want to come back." And this, of course, again, is a nod to the audience and is a bit of a foreshadowing line, because It shows us that characters in this world are constantly dying. Good characters, that is, are constantly dying. You know, there's nothing good that seems to ever come of it. And of course, this also implies that a character we have grown to like in Oberyn Martell is about to die in the end of this episode. So I didn't have many thoughts about this location, unfortunately, but I do have a lot more to say about things coming up. For example, with the next scene I want to talk about, Moat Caitlin. Just to recap, Ramsay Snow rehearses his plans with Reek, who will be masquerading as his former self, aka Theon Greyjoy. He rides a horse with the white flag. Theon enters the moat, and he is received by, I guess, the commander of that fort, Ralph Kenning, who is basically in charge of the Ironman station there. Theon gives him the terms for their surrender, which Kenning intends to decline, but he is killed by one of his own men, who assumes command and accepts the terms. But then the Ironborn open the gates of Moat Cailin to the Bolton's men, and of course they are all flayed and slaughtered by Ramsay and his army. And as a reward for retaking the moat, Lord Roose Bolton legitimizes Ramsay using his new authority as Warden of the North to make Ramsay a true Bolton. Now, there are a few moments in this scene that I really enjoyed. I think the most memorable line for me was when, after Ramsay is legitimized by Roose, Ramsay says to Reek, quote, "Come, Reek, I'll be needing a bath," as they ride back home. And Reek's face when that was said, well, I think it said it all, really. His blank stare. There's, clearly something going on between these two characters. There's clearly some kind of a sexual, not relationship, I would say, but I guess a sexual interaction or connection going on. I definitely think that Ramsay is, if he hasn't yet, he's definitely going to be sexually abused by Reek is going to be sexually abused by Ramsay in the near future. And I think this is also reaffirmed the idea that he probably has been sexually abused when Theon, Theon reaches Moat Cailin. The commander says to him, quote, "Only a whipped dog or a woman would talk this way of surrender. Are you a woman, boy?" And, Reek starts to tremble and shiver. And I guess for overt reasons, this kind of hints to the fact that he is treated like a dog. But when he said he is paralleled as a woman, it both reaffirms the idea that he's probably, or that we can assume that he is castrated, but also the fact that he is, almost treated like a woman, quote unquote, by Ramsay, literally, in terms of almost in a relationship type of sense, if that made any sense. Apologize, guys, it's really late here. I'm trying to just get all my thoughts out there, and I have a lot of crazy things to think about, or a lot of crazy things I want to say, I guess. So bear with me. There's some things that might blow your mind, I guess, if you stick with this. Anyway, also, the only thought I have about the scene with Roose legitimizing Ramsay is that it kind of is meant to stand in contrast with the relationship between Ned and Jon Snow. Ned Stark, that is, of course. Because in spite of the emotional distance between Roose and Ramsay, Ramsay is legitimized and he is kept close to his father's side all the time. Or at least most of the time, anyway. Whereas with Ned, who, although really does care for Jon, he pretty much sends him away and ensures that Jon remains a Snow, or remains a bastard, which is quite intriguing. But it does speak to the nature of Game of Thrones as a whole, I think, and the fact that we can never really expect our favorite characters to ever have a happy ever after, if that made sense. Anyway, next scene I want to discuss is events across the Narrow Sea. So here we have a scene with Missandei, who catches Grey Worm watching her bathe, and though she seeks advice from Daenerys, and talks about a potential relationship with Grey Worm, Daenerys kind of reaffirms that all Unsullied are made eunuchs at an early age, and of course they are presumed to not be capable of engaging in sexual intercourse. But I think there is a strong implication here that they are very capable of being romantically interested in people at the very least. And this was reaffirmed when Missandei and Grey Worm discuss the fact that he saw her naked. So I think there's definitely the possibility we could see a romance blossom there, at least on a platonic level, clearly, because, Grey Worm lacks certain bits, but I think we're going to see how men who are quote, not truly men can form affectionate bonds. And I do think this scene is kind of meant to mirror the corrupt sort of relationship Ramsay and Reek have, where it's more of an abusive relationship where the castrated man in Reek is basically exploited by Ramsay, whereas here it's more of an equal footing type of relationship. One is, very, very corrupt, lustful, and this one is very, very innocent, sweet, I guess, if that makes any sense. Anyway, now, in terms of Daenerys' interaction with Missandei here, I do need to state that I am still a strong Daenerys fan, as you can see by the poster behind me, but honestly, this episode, she did some things that really, really irked me. Later on, for example, when Grey Worm meets with Missandei, well, I'll get to the parts of Daenerys that irked me in a bit, but first I just want to say that later on when Grey Worm met with Missandei, he says, quote, that Jorah the Andal taught the word precious to Grey Worm. And this is interesting that Grey Worm states this, especially given the context of meeting Missandei and Daenerys, because later on, Jorah loses something that is precious to him in the form of Daenerys as his ruler by his own actions. So it's a kind of an ironic line in a sense that, or an ironic word that Jorah taught to Grey Worm, because whereas Grey Worm is able to, or has a desire to retain or hold on to what is most precious to him, not even caring about his own past, Jorah Mormont's past comes back to haunt him, and he is, as a result, forced to face up to that past, and consequently loses what is most precious to him in the form of Daenerys, which is so, so tragic. As I was alluding to, of course, later on, Sir Barristan receives a letter sealed with the hand of the King's seal, which is, of course, a letter from Tywin Lannister. He gives this letter to Ser Jorah and explains that it is a royal pardon signed by Robert Baratheon some years ago, I guess, in exchange for Jorah spying on Daenerys. Jorah admits that he did spy on her and that she... And then she basically orders him to leave Meereen and never return. Yeah, I guess this is, like I was saying, the biggest thing that irked me about Daenerys. The ease in which she was able to dismiss Jorah for spying. And, it was a gesture that, it was something that he recanted so long ago. It's really quite surprising, given that he saved her life to kind of redeem himself for his betrayal, at least internally, and now he's kind of owning up to it. But again, as is evidenced by the fact that Daenerys' dragons were not present, and I've made this comment before where, if a mythical creature of one of the main characters is not near them or around them, it's kind of there's kind of an implication that character is not really being true to themselves or being emotionally honest or thinking or acting for their own interests. And I definitely think that Daenerys' dragons not being present is emblematic of the fact that she's not acting true to her best interest or being completely emotionally honest with herself. So, she's kind of just presenting herself as with a cold exterior and trying to rule as a queen rather than act as, I guess, the mother of dragons in this context. So all I can really say is, given that, my thoughts basically propose that, Daenerys being close to dragons means that she is on a good path. I gotta say, I really hope we see her and her dragons reunited or together in a scene soon, because I think dismissing Jorah Mormont in this context is probably one of the worst things she could have done, because he is the one thing, at least especially this season, that has pretty much kept her doing some, or at least kept her, or it has ensured that she has made rational decisions. And I'm thinking, of course, of his warning that, she shouldn't trust Dario because he is a sellsword and he has betrayed other people in the past. So, yeah, definitely dismissing Jorah Mormont was not a bright idea for Daenerys. Now, the next scene I want to discuss is events in the Vale. This scene I have a lot to say. It was crazy, crazy stuff. A lot of changes from the book. But I think the biggest thing here is that, this scene really capped off where we are, in terms of book readers, are at with Sansa Stark's storyline. Because with this scene that just took place in this episode, I think we're pretty much caught up with everything we can know about this character, at least that has been revealed so far in the book. So I'm really curious as to how they're going to progress her story from now on. But anyway, just to recap events in the Vale, it starts off with having, murdered his wife, Peter Baelish meets with a few of the nobility of the Vale including Lord Jon Royce. Peter tells them that Lysa committed suicide by jumping through the moon door, but these lords do not trust him, bringing up his whorehouses in King's Landing and Foreign Blood. Royce demands to speak with Sansa, who is acting as Peter's niece Elaine. She is brought in to speak to the group, and she appears to crumble under the pressure of the situation, admitting her true identity to the group as Sansa Stark. Sansa corroborates Peter's story and convinces them of his innocence. And as Peter walks the group out of the Eyrie, he makes plans to have, I guess, Robin tour the Vale. Now, again, I have a lot I need to say about this scene. It's mostly spoilery stuff, so I will save that for the group chat. But at the same time, it looks like the show has pretty much officially caught up with the books, like I said, in terms of Sansa's progression. I will say I loved the apparently proper way the lords and ladies of the Vale speak. You know, it was very aristocratic, and it almost reminded me a little bit of the Queen's English to a slight degree, maybe. You know, it was a very proud and mighty tone they took, which was very, very unique and kind of different from most of the other accents, I guess, we've seen so far in Westeros. So I guess kudos to them for doing an amazing job in conveying the quote-unquote high culture that exists in the Vale. I will say I did find it strange that for all of Peter's foresight, it is really weird that he was not able to foresee that these lords and ladies of the Lady of the Vale would want to interrogate Sansa as well, considering she's a witness. So I had trouble buying into that a little bit, because even though they played this occurrence off in this episode as Peter Baelish being unaware of Sansa being forced to testify, and and is shocked by her decision to speak in his favor, it did come across as kind of strange, because that wasn't something I would have foreseen happening, I guess, if that makes sense. And again, on that note, I was also very much taken aback by the way Sansa has actually become a seemingly manipulative character so quickly. I will say I did think she would grow in that direction, but I am surprised at how rapid she seems to be making that transition. She was always a character who seemed very weak and easily manipulated, but now all of a sudden she's the one calling the shots in a weird way, which is strange, because I always thought maybe Peter Baelish would play a role in that transition for her character. So this scene did catch me, or this, I guess, occurrence in the TV show or in this episode did catch me a little off guard, if that makes sense. Another thing I really found was interesting, maybe not important, but interesting in terms of my own interests, is that we find out that Peter Baelish has a great-grandfather who is from Braavos, and of course the Lords of Vale seem to hold this slightly against him, which is interesting. In one sense, I think this was a nod to the fact that Peter Baelish was Master of Coin in King's Landing, the Small Council, which again is a sort of semi-nod to the fact that Braavos is renowned for its banking, or its iron bank, and of course if Peter Baelish is Master of Coin, he is, there's a monetary connection there between these two, this character and his great-grandfather's cultural origins, I guess. But another interesting thing about this first scene between Lord Jon Royce and Baelish is that Royce also approaches Baelish for being a, quote, moneylender, his words, which is quite an interesting insult to use in this context. Now, in my spoiler-friendly group review a few weeks ago, I made the comment that there are some elements of Braavos that sort of remind me of the roles that were ascribed to and, stereotyped around Jews during the medieval and Renaissance periods. Now, I don't want to come across as I guess anti-Semitic necessarily, but there was this idea that Jews were kind of bankers, and they were oftentimes chastised as moneylenders during the Middle Ages, since it was against Christianity and of course Christians therefore could not become moneylenders because it was considered usury. Whereas, with Jews, they could perform that role in the context of medieval Europe, so it was kind of seen as okay for them, although they were at the same time berated for taking on that kind of profession because it was, not proper, it was unchristian, basically, even though they weren't even Christian. But that's one reason, I guess, why I was kind of intrigued by the fact that Royce used the term moneylender on Peter Baelish. And another interesting reason that I guess suggests that there's a potential comparison between Jews and Braavos, although perhaps it's more of a contemporary anti-Semitic perception, is the fact that Royce is suspicious of Baelish because of his own foreign, albeit very limited Braavosi ancestry, which Royce kind of contrasts with his pride, with the pride that he has for his own seemingly more pure Andal bloodline, which makes me think a little bit about that contrast between, and maybe this is a bit of a stretch, but the whole racialized argument between the pure Aryan versus the mixed mud-bloody Jew type of thing during the Second World War, I guess. If that makes any sense. Of course, I'm not saying that's how I think. I'm just saying that in the context of this scene, and of course the things that were said, I could see a bit of a parallel there between, comparing the Jews to broader medieval society via the Braavosi and via the fact that Peter Baelish has Braavosi ancestry. So, another thing I think that also kind of corroborates this potential illusion is the fact that the Lord Royce says, quote, "Master of coin has always been a grubby job. Why not let a grubby man do it?" Again, which reaffirms the idea that at the very least, these Lords of the Vale kind of look down on people who use money or who are moneylenders or anybody's attached to money in any sense. So, very, very interesting they made this choice for this episode and for Peter Baelish's storyline anyway, because this wasn't as present in the books anyway, at least as far as I recall. Be that as it may, the next scene we have for events in the Vale is outside of the Eyrie, where Sandor, Clegane, and Arya walk down the narrow path towards the Eyrie. They come to the Bloody Gate, and they are informed of Lady Arryn's death by Lord Waynwood, I believe. And with that said, Arya starts to howl with laughter. Now, I think the main reason why she was bursting in laughter is because, of course, every time Arya gets even remotely close to being with a family member of any kind, they end up dying. This happens, of course, with Ned when she is at the Sept of Baelor, or outside the Sept of Baelor, I guess, or she's by the statue of Baelor the Blessed. That's where she was. Sorry, I'm thinking over these events in my head now. So she sees Ned Stark die. It happens, of course, with Catelyn and Robb when she's about to be reunited with them, and they basically die the same moment she gets to the twins. And now, of course, the most recent time it happens when she basically reaches Lysa Arryn, which is, really shitty for her. Although, ironically enough, Sansa Stark is there, but she doesn't seem to know that yet, which I wonder if they're going to have these two characters reunite in some sense. Although it does seem like Sansa has embraced this identity of Elaine Stone because, in the next scene, the last scene with Sansa anyway, she has dyed her hair jet black and has a dress that almost seems to have a crow or raven feathers protruding from the shoulders. She's clearly no longer adopting that image of the little dove or the sweet bird that she once was, and is seemingly becoming something darker and more sinister overall, which is quite scary, maybe? I don't know. I do get the hint that they're going in a very dark direction with Sansa now. At least that's how it came across in this scene, and I was quite surprised that they chose to make her come across as a more manipulative character, which is not something we have at least overtly seen with Sansa at all in the series so far. So, very much looking forward to seeing what direction they take with this character. Now, for the last scene of, the last scene of this episode is that I want to discuss events in King's Landing. So, shortly before his trial by combat is to begin, Tyrion discusses his chances with Jamie. Now, for starters, I really enjoyed Tyrion and Jamie's discussion of their simple cousin Olsen smashing beetles. And the big question that was posed by Tyrion about what were Olsen's reasons for smashing the beetles had me thinking on so many different tangents. Like, it's kind of ridiculous how much this one line or this one question made me think so many random things for like the hour after I'd watched that episode. Well, I guess I can discuss some of my thoughts on that. For one thing, the Beatles and Tyrion's cousin crushing them was a metaphor for a lot of things. Within the confines of the show, it naturally acts as a foreshadowing of events to happen immediately after, with the mountain crushing Oberyn's head with his bare hands. In the greater spectrum, it is meant to, I think, act as a way to understand why we question certain things more than others, and more importantly, why we do certain things. But I think the most significant reason for us, the viewers of the show, and, at least in terms of how it spoke to us, came across from Jamie's reply when he says, quote, "Every day around the world, men and women and children are murdered by the score. Who gives a fuck about Beatles?" In a way, I really think it reflects strongly on people like me, ironically enough, who spend, so much time discussing, inquiring, questioning, being so inquisitive about everything relating to Game of Thrones, yet seemingly not being as worried or even consciously putting the same amount of thought in events in the real world where people, are actually suffering every day or are dying every day out there. Now, I don't think that this was intentionally meant as a jab to people like me necessarily, but this certainly is something I got out of that specific line from Jamie. It's also intriguing that right after this was said, Tyrion immediately resumes inquiring about why Olsen killed Beatles. And again, I think this, in this context, Tyrion is kind of meant to reflect almost all of us who watch, though, because we all kind of inquire and wonder about certain things that happen in the show. And we're almost put in the Tyrion position here. Such a simple question that seems to matter so little, for the show, just as the small question about Beatles seems to matter so little, we spend so much time dwelling upon, just as Tyrion has for practically all his life, it seems. Now, I live in, I don't know how to talk about this, really. Well, I guess, just to get a little bit more introspective specifically, I was really thinking over this scene when I was walking home from my sister's place, where I watch Game of Thrones because she has HBO. Now, I live in Toronto, and I see homeless people here every day. This is going to come across as really random, but as I was on my way home, I almost knocked over a homeless guy's hat, which, was, I think, meant for passerbys to put money into. Now, normally I would probably just walk along without a thought, but quite literally and probably ironically, the discussion from Tyrion and Jamie made me reflect on why the fact that, I see homeless people every day doesn't really faze me. I guess because I'm used to it. But for this one time, it almost made me think about, why do I put so much thought on things that don't matter as much, like Game of Thrones, versus, these people on the street who don't have a place to live or stay, and who are in, clearly not the best situations. Now, I did have money in my pocket at the time, and I was standing, I guess, a few feet away from this person, and I really did begin to ponder if I should, give him money. I couldn't see the person's face because he was, covered with a hoodie, but I was really thinking that, in a way, I was sort of like Cousin Olsen in this context, and that this random homeless person was a Beatle. Someone, who's basically insignificant in my own life and doesn't really matter all that much. And it's someone I would never really question or think about in any context or circumstance, or think about helping in any real way. But, and of course, when I was thinking about giving this person money for a change, I was thinking about things like, is he going to use it for drugs? Will he legitimately use it for food? What are his motives behind needing money? It was all these really weird thoughts that kind of just came out of this one line from Game of Thrones. And well, I guess fortunately, as I pondered this, I saw a girl come outside of a nearby restaurant, and she gave this homeless person a wrapped up sandwich. And I don't want to sound corny, but I guess I could kind of feel, or I kind of felt like my faith in humanity had been restored at that point, if that makes any sense. I did feel a little bit more relaxed, knowing that there are people out there who do care for these people who, for, all intents and purposes, are seemingly insignificant in the broader scheme of things, just like these Beatles that Cousin Olsen stomps on all the time. Okay, I guess I got really off topic there, but I guess, I don't know, I just felt like I had to share that part of my day in which this one line had such a big impact, and I think has some kind of reason behind, or has at least had carried some kind of meaning towards the show viewers in general, if that makes sense. I guess the last thing I need to say about the line regarding the Beatles and Tyrion's cousin is that we do need to remember that in the world of Game of Thrones, innocent people are crushed or killed by others who are, driven to these acts of violence for whatever strange or unknown reasons. And there's nothing much we can do about it as show viewers or as fans of these certain characters. And this is exemplified in the duel between Gregor and Oberyn. And of course, this marks the fact that little Tyrion was metaphorically crushed by Sir Gregor as well, because his champion lost the duel, and now he is meant to be killed off without a second thought by his own father, who I guess in this context kind of symbolizes cousin Olsen, and Tyrion becomes the beetle in this context. And it kind of begs the question: why do people just generally kill? Not just why does cousin Olsen kill the beetles? Why do people kill for the reasons they do in both Game of Thrones and in the real world? And I guess the easy answer to that would be, people do these things because they can. But of course, if you want to dig deeper into that, you could say, well, they kill maybe because they have, at least in the context of Game of Thrones, they kill like the Mountain kills because he has a bloodlust for it, or he has some kind of innate urge to do that, just like cousin Olsen was driven to kill beetles because that was part of his innate messed up urge. But at the end of the day, maybe these people just kill because they are able to. They can. The Mountain is a huge, tough, big guy, and he has the power and he has the social status to be allowed to commit these atrocious, horrendous acts. The same kind of acts that go on in the world today, everywhere, or in all kinds of locations around the world. Boko Haram just comes to the top of my mind, but again, I'm getting so off topic now. So, yeah, I'll keep talking about the scene at hand. I'm sorry, guys. I am so tired. I get so distracted by so many thoughts when I do these reviews. So, yeah. So when Tyrion is taken outside, he has a brief conversation with his champion Oberyn, who seems pretty confident. Sir Gregor, the Mountain Clegane, arrives shortly thereafter, and the trial commences. Oberyn speaks with the Mountain during the fight, telling him to admit to having raped and murdered his sister Ilya and her 2 children. Oberyn does land several attacks on his opponent, stabbing and cutting him with a spear. As he knocks the Mountain to the ground, Oberyn demands that he confess, screaming at the Mountain and hoping that he will admit that it was Tywin who gave the order, and even points to Tywin at one point, demanding who was the one who told him to kill his sister and her kids. But as this happens, the Mountain reaches out, knocks him to the ground, and pins him by the hand. Mountain grabs Oberyn's head, gouges out his eyes before confessing to the murder of Ilya and her children, and crushes Oberyn's skull. And basically Tywin rises and sentences Tyrion to death for regicide, or for killing his king. Again, reminding us, as so many lines throughout this episode, that there is no true justice in Game of Thrones, or at least in this universe. As the old saying goes, and as is written on my cap, my start cap, in the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. Just want to show off my baseball cap, actually. That's the only reason why I have it here. Anyway, definitely a crazy, crazy episode. There were a lot of changes, again, made from the books to the show in this episode, which were, some are really, really intriguing, really well done. Others I'm still left pondering, undecided in terms of my thoughts on how I feel about those scenes. But all in all, I think this was a really, really great episode. I was kept hooked all the way throughout, so definitely an episode that deserves like an 8.5 out of 10, maybe, if I had to rate it. I have a couple other videos coming out soon. I am going to Poland, however, this Thursday, but I still will be making my weekly reviews, just in a slightly different location. But I intend to, still get my thoughts out there. So, again, if, as I always say, if you enjoyed this review, as blabbery and as tangenty as it was, please do not hesitate to subscribe and like this video, and please leave a comment with your thoughts, because I'm sure you guys have some great thoughts. Normally I might dig into this episode a little bit more, but a lot of the things that I felt came out of it were things, I guess, that maybe related more to myself, or to, things that I've studied or read about in general, like, the historical contexts of things, and, my own personal emotions that came out of certain occurrences this episode. So, yeah. I recently made a video with a fellow Game of Thrones fan, Bilal. It's going to be posted in a few days. It does contain spoilers, and it's about the rise and fall of Old Valyria, so I think you guys should check it out if you have read the books. And I guess that is really all for tonight. So, yeah. Thanks again for watching if you hopefully enjoyed this, if you made it this far. And I will see you folks later. So, take care.